You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. In November 2021, the Chabad of the Beaches, that's Long Beach, Atlantic Beach, and Lido Beach, purchased the former Capital One branch. They had a big building in Atlantic Beach. They held the Hanukkah party the first week of December, and then the village of Atlantic Beach decided they want to take away the property for use using the eminent domain process of doing so. With us right now is Rabbi Eli Goodman. He is the rabbi of the Chabad of the Beaches. He's joined by his attorney, Jeremy Dys Esq, First Liberty. They are a group that protects religious liberties across the nation. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Brenner.
So here you are. You're celebrating the miracle of Hanukkah, and then what happens? I'm talking about December 2021. Then what happens after the miracle of Hanukkah?
Well, we had a beautiful Hanukkah celebration. We had many people over there. And literally, I think it was less than 2 weeks later, we received a letter from the village of Atlantic Beach that they are starting the process of eminent domain. And pretty quickly, I had to figure out what exactly that was. And it was a shock to us that our property was being taken away literally from us right after we had a beautiful event. And we were in the process of starting to renovate the facility and turn it into a beautiful community center, offering religious services, religious education, Jewish outreach activities, the things that Chabad houses do throughout the world.
So they wanted, the village of Atlantic Beach wants to use it for a community center. You want to make it a Jewish community center. So they send you a letter and they begin the process where they want to take it away from you so they can convert it. How long has the property been vacant? I'm referring to the bank that you bought in November 2021.
Years. Really, there was no interest in the property. They had multiple signs from different real estate agents trying to sell the property. And after going back and forth, literally hundreds, if not maybe thousands of times, and seeing that property, we thought this would be the ideal location for our Chabad center. And therefore, we reached the owners and we purchased it for a sizable sum.
Did you try reaching out to the village of Atlantic Beach once you got that letter? Did you have communications, negotiations with them about what was happening to you?
We did. We were a little bit shocked. We didn't know exactly what the reasons were for it. And off the record, somebody from the village met with us, but we didn't really have any communications. They kept on saying that the lawyers are dealing with it, and they didn't really want to have much negotiation or much discussion about it.
And certainly Rabbi Goodman took advantage of the political process in general, going to the public meetings and making his voice heard as a member of the community. Others, I think, also spoke up on behalf of the rabbi, whether or not they were coordinated, just they were talking about this property in the public meetings. And certainly the city was aware of Rabbi Goodman and Chabad of the Beaches' opportunity to use that property for a community center. And despite knowing all those facts, that this is the heart of the Chabad to be a community center for the city of Atlantic Beach, but also specifically with regard to their Jewish faith, the city ignored all that and decided that they want the property. And since they have the heavy hammer of eminent domain, they decided to deploy that strategy. And in fact, Zev, I got to tell you, we gave them an extra week before we even filed this lawsuit, asking them to reconsider that. They took an entire week to think that through. And at the end of that week, they decided that they still wanted to proceed with the eminent domain proceedings. So here we are, now seeking protection in federal court from the heavy hand of the Atlantic Beach City Council or Village Commission, and preventing them from actually taking this property that belongs to a religious organization when they own multiple pieces of property that they can create their lifeguard operations center upon those properties. They don't need this piece of property.
So tell me about eminent domain. So can they take any property on the theory that they need it? You mentioned they have other properties. So how does it work?
Yeah, eminent domain requires a public purpose for taking the property. Look, this is in our country, in our system of justice, the people own the ground that they sit on, and the property that they own belongs to them. It doesn't belong to the government. And so the Supreme Court has held that the cities, the villages, they can take public property, but they've got to have a very significant reason for doing so. And then they also have to have a public purpose for which the taking is going to be met. But on top of all of that, that's just regular eminent domain proceedings. On top of that process, when it comes to a religious organization that owns a piece of property, the city has to provide a substantial justification, a compelling reason for why they need to take not just a property, but this religious organization's property. And the compelling justification here is that they need to move Baywatch inside of this building. They need to create a lifeguard operations center in order to serve the Atlantic Beach community. Here's the problem. That's not a compelling justification. They've got a 3-acre parcel just down the street that they can certainly use to be able to do that. Just a couple blocks away, there's, I think, about a 5-acre parcel that the city owns outright. They can certainly, and that's actually closer to the beach where they could put the lifeguards. Right across the street from the Chabad's property is the firehouse, and there's a vacant spot right beside them that they could build an operations center or build a storage unit for them to be able to store their different surfboards and whatever else they've got to use. In other words, there's no compelling justification for why this specific property is the one that they have to take in order to be able to meet their needs of that community. And certainly if it was such a pressing issue years ago, the city would have gotten involved and purchased this property. They did not. Now they realize that is being used for religious purposes, and perhaps that's the motivation for wanting to take this property. They're going to have to explain that to the federal court.
It doesn't look very suspicious. Here you have a property. It could have been 2, 3, 4 years late vacant. All of a sudden, Rabbi Goodman and Chabad purchased the property. And then they wake up, we need this for eminent domain for a community center. Why didn't they do that the year before, 2 years before? And so I don't understand their legal theory based on that. It seems to me that it's doomed to failure. Unless, tell me what prospects they may have. Can they still push it even though that it was vacant for so many years? Can they wake up and say, once we saw it's going to be for a religious institution, we want to use it for a secular one? What's their argument? What could it be?
That would actually be the worst argument they could possibly make, but it sounds sort of like that's where it's going, is that they've even indicated that perhaps there was backroom discussions about taking this property several years ago. They never did act upon that. But now that this property is owned by the Chabad of the Beaches, this is a religious ownership now that they're going to have a heightened standard to be able to meet in order to take that property. I don't think they really quite grasp that yet. The reality is that this is not an isolated event. We see this kind of thing happening around the country. Years ago, I represented...
There are other cases in eminent domain when they've used it to squeeze out a religious group?
Yeah, I represented an African-American church in the inner city of Houston several years ago that the city, these churches, low-income area, very bad area, these pastors moved in to try to revitalize the neighborhood and did a really good job. And then the city of Houston decided they could actually make some tax dollars off the property that they owned. And so they tried to take a piece of property that the church owned for, as like sort of a prayer walk area. And they hold outdoor events on this piece of sand that's across the street from their church building. The city wanted that to turn it into a profitable center. We stepped in and protected that, and the city backed off. And wouldn't you know, a couple years later, this pandemic thing hits, and nobody can meet inside their building. Guess where they're having services? They're meeting outside on that piece of property. Just last year in the city of Dallas, we represented a church in Oak Cliff outside of Dallas, where the city had a fire station across the street from this church, but they weren't satisfied with that fire station, and so they wanted to build a new one. And guess where they wanted to build it? Where this African-American church had their building. And so we had to file a lawsuit again under Texas's protections for religious freedom of religious institutions, and we won that lawsuit as well. So I think it's important for the village of Atlantic Beach to realize this is not our first rodeo, and us, along with Sidley, which is one of the largest law firms in the world, and the Harvard Legal Clinic and the Religious Freedom Clinic, they're working with us here to protect the institution of the Chabad of the Beaches and frankly, for the religious liberty of every religious institution to be safe from cities trying to steal their property through eminent domain.
Rabbi Goodman, how did you get in touch with First Liberty? I know the whole concept of eminent domain was not on your regular vocabulary list, and this whole process was new to you. So how did you get connected?
That's a good question. The reality is that I have to keep up with the news as we try to show how everything that happens in the world is something relevant and there's a message. And I noticed the particular case that was making its way up to the Supreme Court with the football coach. There was a football coach that had a private prayer somewhere on the 50-yard line, and I saw that it was going all the way up to the Supreme Court. And I was thinking to myself, how was he able to go all the way to the Supreme Court? He obviously needed a little bit of help to be able to take on the university that was really giving him a very, very difficult time, and it seemed to be a very unfair go at it. So I saw First Liberty was the name of the law firm that was helping him. So I went onto the website and I reached out to them, and I shared with them what was going on in Atlantic Beach. They asked for more information. Then we had a conference call, and one thing led to the other. And we're very blessed and honored that First Liberty has chosen to take up our case and help us, together with the rest of the team, to ensure that there is religious liberty in Atlantic Beach.
Rabbi Eli Goodman is a spiritual leader of the Chabad of the Beaches. And they recently purchased a property in Atlantic Beach for a community center, and the village of Atlantic Beach wants to take it away under the right of eminent domain. They want to have their own cultural center. Jeremy Dys joins us. He is with First Liberty, and he is representing Chabad in defending themselves against eminent domain from the village of Atlantic Beach. Jeremy, I understand this is not the first Chabad case that First Liberty has been involved with. You were working with different Chabads around the country. Am I correct?
Yeah, we love to work for the religious liberty of all Americans. That includes our friends in the Jewish community. So we've defended the Chabads up in Airmont, New York. The city there has been, well, for several decades, they've been engaged in some pretty severe anti-Semitic activity, and certainly questioning the religious liberty of the synagogues up in that area. It seems like almost every year during the high holidays, we have to represent some folks out in California where animal rights groups don't like their practices of Kaporos. And so we've successfully protected their right to be able to engage in that ancient tradition out there as well. And of course, wherever the matter of religious liberty is affecting the Jewish community and any other religious community for that matter, we want to be at the forefront of leading that charge. Folks can certainly read more about those cases at firstliberty.org if they'd like to go there and find out more about how we operate.
No, thank God. Now, Rabbi Goodman alluded that when you bring these kinds of lawsuits, it costs a lot of money, depending on the situation. It could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. It could be millions of dollars. So you have great legal representation. So how are you funded?
There are great people around the country that believe in the mission of religious liberty and understand that it is the cornerstone of our freedom in this country. And so they are kind enough to invest in our organization. And we never send a bill to people like Rabbi Goodman. The clients that we represent get their work pro bono. The partners that we put together with these firms that work with us, they donate their time pro bono as well. So, Coach Kennedy, he referred to that case recently. That was an almost 7-year legal battle, and he will never get a bill from us or any of the attorneys and the top level attorneys that he's received on his team that have defended him. He'll never get a bill for those things. And here's why. If the government violates your civil rights, we believe firmly that you should never have to pay an attorney to get those back. Instead, you ought to have the government understand that their place is to protect the civil rights of every American, including synagogues and churches and other places of worship around this country. They should never have to pay an attorney to get those rights back.
Now, is there any religious groups or ideology that you wouldn't defend on the basis of religious freedom? Is there any group that you'd find offensive or that you wouldn't want to touch in defending their civil liberties? Or is it you open to everybody no matter what the religious beliefs are? I'm referring
maybe there's something far flung out there, so I won't put a categorical yes on that answer. But we've represented everybody from synagogues to the Falun Gong to Native American religious groups, of course, Baptists and Presbyterians and individual religious Protestants, Christians, and Catholics. So we've got a pretty significant group from which we've represented, again, because if you defend religious liberty for one faith tradition, it's defending religious liberty for all of our faith traditions. So we all benefit from that. And at the end of the day, it is our first liberty in the Constitution, the First Amendment, that we're protecting, whether it's finding expression within a Jewish group or a Baptist group or whatever. That's how we preserve our freedom in this country, by preserving our first liberty.
Let's get back to the village of Atlantic Beach. So here they file this notice of eminent domain. So what are your legal steps? What is happening now with the case?
Now, we filed a federal lawsuit in the Eastern District of New York. We filed that last Thursday, and on Friday morning, we woke up to a signed order from the federal judge there in the Eastern District, temporarily restraining the city of Atlantic Beach from doing anything to take the property of the Chabad of the Beaches. And so we'll have to answer that eminent domain proceeding in state court, and that will probably find a stay pretty soon until the federal case is resolved. On July 29th, there will be a hearing in the Eastern District. We'll be making an argument there to convert that temporary restraining order into a preliminary injunction that we hope will become much more permanent and ultimately resolve the matter on behalf of the Chabad. And of course, at any time, if the city just simply wants to go about its business and welcome this Chabad into their community, we would, of course, have discussions about that to make sure that the city of Atlantic Beach or the village of Atlantic Beach, I guess it is well served by a diverse population, including the Chabad of the Beaches, which I think
We
just
have a large Jewish population. That's why I find it somehow, I won't say strange or bewildering. Why would they want to ban? They have Atlantic Beach is one of the fastest growing Jewish areas in Long Island. So, Rabbi Goodman, why are they looking to this, in your opinion, discriminate against Chabad?
I have the same question. That's the reason why we felt that there is a need. There are many people over there that's unserved by the current institutions. We in Long Beach is our main center. Some of the people from Atlantic Beach come to us in Long Beach, but we've been serving them for many years. We've been around on the Barrier Islands for over 17 years, and we've done events in Atlantic Beach in different homes and different places. But we felt now it's time to take it to the next level and have a separate home, a home for the people in Atlantic Beach and the entire Barrier Island, because tens of thousands of cars pass there every single day, and we want to give everybody an opportunity to directly benefit from all that Chabad offers, like we offer all around the globe.
Now, from what I understand, you weren't planning to make it a synagogue. You were going to make it a center, right? So it wasn't going to be where they had daily services or Sabbath services. It was going to be more of a center for people to come in with food. Is that what the plans were or are?
Well, we're still figuring it out. Our main focus is a religious community center. So obviously, there are going to be types of Jewish outreach and religious instruction. So that's definitely an important part, because that's Chabad. We are a religious organization. But at the same time, as we focus on outreach, we try to make the types of programs something that people, if necessarily they're not a typical worshiper and would like to go to a religious service, there are many other religious services that we provide programs for teens, for young Jewish professionals, for young adults, adult education, humanitarian programs. So there's a whole host of programs. And as we see this unfold, then hopefully this will be resolved very quickly, so we can meet with our architects, we can meet with our team and formalize exactly what this center will offer.
Jeremy, will this be resolved so quickly? The other case you mentioned of Coach Kenny took 7 years. What time frame are we looking at in this particular situation?
Well, hopefully not 7 years, but really that's up to the village of Atlantic Beach, is how long they want to fight this issue. Typically cities don't run into a whole lot of opposition, and they seem to hold all the power when it comes to matters of eminent domain. But, again, we've got a mandate from people all over the country to preserve the religious freedom of groups like the Chabad of the Beaches. So we're happy to continue the battle for as long as it takes. But again, as soon as the village wants to welcome this organization into its community to be a more diverse and a welcoming city, we're happy to figure out an amicable resolution of the matter so that occurs. I think as you hear Rabbi Goodman speaking, you're hearing of his heart for the village of Atlantic Beach. He wants to serve that community. There's a need for that service in that community. And I would think that the elders of the village of Atlantic Beach would be only too excited to have a good neighbor like Rabbi Goodman and his group come into their town and serve that neighborhood.
So let's take the worst case scenario. They don't want to be good neighbors. They want to continue the fight. They don't want to have the Chabad house there no matter what. So realistically, what period of time? You mentioned you got to do in federal court. There's also state court proceedings. Courts take a long time. What do you anticipate it can be if they refuse to cooperate?
I'll give you what the answer that my law professors used to give me as well in those questions. It just depends. It could take anywhere from a couple weeks to a couple months to a couple years. But ultimately, as long as it takes for us to make sure that Rabbi Goodman and his group there in the Barrier Islands are able to serve that community, that's what we're in for.
Now, Rabbi Goodman is stymied. He cannot fix the place. Obviously, he can still meet there, but it would probably be foolish for him to spend money doing architectural plans until this is resolved. Or can he go ahead with it and try to get money from them at the end in the worst case scenario in case they do take it over?
It would be kind of dusty to meet in those conditions right now with all the drywall that's on the ground and all that kind of thing. So maybe that's not the best place to meet, but he can certainly use the property. The state court the federal court right now has prevented the city from, enforcing any kind of code against them that would prevent them from meeting there. But you're right to say that there's some judicious decisions that they've got to make to see how much they want to invest in that community. knowing that the village is less than welcoming right now. So I hope the tune of the village will change very soon, that reasonable minds will prevail, and that they would extend the arms of welcome to that community rather than to continue to box them out.
Rabbi Goodman, I assume you're not going to be doing anything there until this is resolved.
Well, we'll have to wait and see. We'll see how the legal procedures work out. But I just want to share with you that from Atlantic Beach, we've had so many emails and phone calls from people welcoming us, people excited for us. People are shocked about what is taking place. And I think at the end of the day, this will be resolved, and I hope it will be resolved quickly. But I think at the end of the day, I think the village of Atlantic Beach will see that Chabad of the Beaches is only going to bring more warmth, more joy. And at the end of the day, Atlantic Beach will be a better village with us being there. And I just think this is hopefully this is just a temporary little bump in the road. And I think the long term is that, we will really do something very, very special for the community. And I think people realize that already. And we've had a lot of emails and from different walks of life, all different ways from people, Jewish and non-Jewish, have expressed their support. And we appreciate that. And we look forward to resolving this very quickly.
Rabbi Eli Goodman is our guest. He is a spiritual leader of the Chabad of the Beaches. They bought the former Capital One branch in Atlantic Beach. The village of Atlantic Beach wants to take it away under the right of eminent domain to make it a community center. Jeremy Dys is his lawyer with First Liberty, which protects religious freedoms. Jeremy, walk me through how it works with eminent domain. Do they have to have a vote from the council? Can just a group, or that's the board of a village, decide they want to do eminent domain? How does it usually work? Because I don't believe it was given to a referendum to the people in Atlantic Beach.
Yeah, no, the power of the eminent domain resides within the city, and so they don't have to have a referendum on this issue at all. They can just simply act to take it in a process that allows them to advance a public purpose or announce a public purpose. And typically, what you see eminent domain being used for is, a new road has to be built, or perhaps a new sewage pipe has to be run through a certain piece of ground, or electrical poles have to be erected, or something like that, or and outlying areas, trains have to have tracks laid down, so they've got to take property in that regard. It's fairly rare, although it does happen, that they then take property like this in a way that will disadvantage a religious institution. And so there are laws in this country, namely the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, that is a federal statute that requires the city, if they want to do that, they can certainly do that, but they have to advance a compelling justification for doing so, and announce that they have engaged in the least restrictive means possible in achieving that purpose.
But Jeremy, but you said something very interesting, because I can understand if you have to build a railroad, you need the tracks, you need the building for a highway. So that makes sense for eminent domain. But here, a community center, who said it has to be on this corner? It could be on another corner.
That's precisely it. That's exactly it. Exactly. And when the city administrative building is less than a block away, they've got multiple pieces of property within a 5 or 6 block radius of where the Chabad of the Beaches property is. It's going to be compelling. It's going to be very difficult for them to advance a compelling reason for why this specific property is the one that they must have in order to move the entire cast of Baywatch into to serve their purposes here. That's not what I don't think any federal court in the country is going to agree that that a lifeguard operations center is so important to the city of Atlantic Beach, the village of Atlantic Beach, that they've got to take a religious organization's property away from them, pay them reasonable fees for doing so, of course, but that's not going to be a compelling reason for anybody to say, oh yeah, you go ahead and take that property, seize that property, so that this religious institution has got to go look somewhere else, when the city itself owns their own property less than a couple blocks away that they can put the lifeguards in there instead. So I think the burden is heavily upon the village of Atlantic Beach, and I'm not quite sure that they fully realize just how important a burden that is right now.
Do you believe that is fueled by anti-Semitism?
Well, look, I think it's fueled by religious discrimination, and that they're specifically saying that they want this property. I mean, they know it's owned by a Jewish organization. It's hard to make any other argument than that they want to keep that religious organization out of the village of Atlantic Beach. Certainly the population around there would support this organization. I do find it curious that there's not another church, house of worship, other than another synagogue in the village of Atlantic Beach. But at the end of the day, I think they've targeted this specific property for whatever reason that they may have. We'll find out exactly why in a couple of days. But it doesn't ultimately matter what their reason for choosing this property is. They found a property that is religious. And so now the law requires them to advance a compelling justification for taking that specific piece of ground away from this religious organization, because we've learned from history that the government seizing the property of a religious institution turns out really, really bad for the idea of freedom. That's why the Constitution and our laws protect groups like Rabbi Goodman's from the heavy hand of government seizing that property and converting it into their own.
How does it work? Let's say, let's take the worst case scenario where they say, where, they win. Under the right of eminent domain, what do they have to pay for a property? What Rabbi Goodman paid for it? Do they pay the face value today? Do they pay more? Do they pay a penalty? How does that whole process work?
The city would have to advance a proposal that would be a reasonable rate within the market itself up there, and then they would have some negotiations on that. But look, I hope it never even comes to that.
I hope
There's never be a negotiation about that
scenarios. I hope it never comes to that. But I'm just curious how it works. The reason why I asked that question, should Rabbi, listen, let's be realistic. If they decide they want to pursue it all the way, it can take years. It can take 2 years, 3 years. Who knows how long it can take. But Rabbi Goodman cannot do any construction, do anything work over there. So my question really was motivated by saying, what happens if he does the construction now? And the worst case scenario is if he doesn't win, would they have to pay for that stuff aside from whatever the purchase price? Would they have to pay whatever improvements he made during that course of time? That was really what my question was.
I'm not entirely sure the answer to that question, but I do know this, that if the city continues to press this, my guess is, and I could be wrong, but I don't think that they have pro bono counsel on their side. They have attorneys that they have to pay, and those attorneys, they don't work for cheap, and so they're going to have to empty the coffers of the Village of Atlantic Beach in order to pay them. We've got a whole slew of attorneys on our side that are donating their time, and they're here because they think it's a righteous cause, and we can ride this sucker out for as long as it takes to preserve the freedom for Rabbi Goodman here. I don't know, and maybe they have sources of income that I'm not aware of, but I'd be surprised to see if the Village of Atlantic Beach has such a hefty legal budget in their overall city budget, which, by the way, if at the end of the day we're successful in preventing the city from doing this, for the mere inconvenience of having to take this legal action, Rabbi Goodman would be entitled to his attorney's fees in this matter. So we're certainly keeping track of our time to make sure that if and when we win for Rabbi Goodman, that we're made whole for having done so.
No, absolutely. It makes lots of sense. Finally, Rabbi Goodman, if let's say this thing schleps for a period of time, what alternative plans do you have in Atlantic Beach?
Well, I mean, the reason why we reached out to First Liberty was because there are no real alternatives at this point in time.
But upfront functioning, because you want this property, you're not planning to buy another one. You can't afford to do so. But if in the case that it takes a long period of time for this to be adjudicated by the courts, what are your plans in the next year or two? Because if they don't compromise, who knows how long it can take?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I'd have to meet with our board, would have to meet with our attorneys, and we'll have to see what is the likeliness of success, how long it's going to take. I mean, we have a court date, July 29th, and I'm not a lawyer, but I think that the judge, gave us the TRO. So I think it's an indication that they feel that we have definitely a worthy cause, and we're very confident.
What you're seeing there is just precisely the problem of why these laws are in place, is to prevent this very thing from happening. They certainly can operate out of their Long Beach center, but in order to reach the community of Atlantic Beach, they have no other alternative. And that's the point. The city has multiple other alternatives to put their lifeguard operations center in, or put a playground up, or whatever it is that they think that they need that piece of property for. But this organization has no other alternative.
But Jim, even if it has other alternatives, it still wouldn't give them the right to do so, because they have the right to perform their services at the center they bought. If the only reason why Atlantic Beach wants to take it away because they want to stop them from doing so, even if they have other alternatives, they shouldn't be allowed to under the law anyway.
That's exactly right. And that's why we're here to prevent that very thing from happening. And I'm glad, frankly, that in this country, we've got multiple legal options to prevent cities from taking property like this and seizing it for their own control.
No, it's so important. So this is a federal action on the 29th. What happens after that?
We're going to have to, we'll find out. The judge enters a preliminary injunction that really kind of ends the case. I mean, we'll have a little bit more things to wrap up and to figure out, but If that injunction is entered in favor of, is extended, I guess, in favor of the Chabad of the Beaches, then it's going to be a real uphill climb for the village to continue to advance further beyond that.
If the TRO is not renewed, what does that mean?
Well, then we'll just simply engage in a little bit of discovery, and we'll very soon thereafter move for summary judgment, and then the case will be resolved. Or maybe we'll choose to appeal to the Second Circuit there in New York and see if we can't get this thing resolved at that next level. If we have to, we can go to the Supreme Court after that, I suppose. But look, we've got multiple options available to us. We've got as much time as we need to make it happen. We'll do so as long as it takes to make sure that reasonable minds prevail and recognize that the Chabad of the Beaches here is a plus add. It's an addition, a good addition to the village of Atlantic Beach, and not one to be kept out just because they don't like them there.
Jeremy Dys with First Liberty, thank you for the work that you do, not only for Chabad of the Beaches, but for religious liberty, or like you said, across the divide, no matter what religion is. If one group is discriminated against, it means the other one can be discriminated against tomorrow. But thank you for standing up for religious liberties. And Rabbi Eli Goodman, the spiritual head of the Chabad of the Beaches, thank you for being with us. We hope this thing gets adjudicated very, very soon.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks for
listening.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.